Eleanor Whitmore stood at the window of her Boston townhouse, watching the first snow of December fall softly over Beacon Hill. At 78 years old, she'd lived in this house for 53 years, ever since her late husband Robert bought it for them in 1970. The 4-story brownstone was worth millions now, filled with a lifetime of memories, art, and antiques. But Eleanor was dying, and she knew it. The doctors had given her 3 months, maybe 4. Pancreatic cancer, too advanced for treatment to matter. She'd declined chemotherapy, choosing quality over quantity for her remaining days. Her only daughter, Victoria, lived in London with her banker husband and rarely visited. They'd grown apart over the years, separated by more than just an ocean. Victoria had always been more interested in Eleanor's money than in Eleanor herself. Eleanor had been preparing for the end methodically, organizing papers, updating her will, deciding what would happen to her considerable estate. Robert had been a successful investment banker, and she'd managed his legacy wisely. She was worth approximately $12 million, mostly in property and investments. Victoria assumed she'd inherit everything. Eleanor had other plans. Every morning for the past 6 years, Eleanor walked to the small park 2 blocks from her house. It was part of her routine: coffee at the corner cafe, then a slow walk through the park regardless of weather, feeding the pigeons, sitting on her favorite bench watching the city wake up. And for the past 6 years, she'd seen the same homeless man in that park. His name was Thomas, though she hadn't learned that until much later. He was perhaps 45, though street life made him look older. He had kind eyes, a gentle manner, and always said good morning when she passed. Unlike other homeless individuals who sometimes asked aggressively for money, Thomas simply existed quietly in his corner of the park, bothering no one. Eleanor had watched Thomas through seasons and years. She'd seen him help an elderly woman who'd fallen on the ice, refusing the $20 she'd tried to give him afterward. She'd watched him share his meager food with a stray dog that eventually became his constant companion. She'd observed him reading discarded newspapers cover to cover, his intelligence evident in the way he absorbed information. Most tellingly, she'd seen him return a wallet he'd found to a frantic young mother, declining her reward, despite obviously needing money desperately. Thomas was different from other people Eleanor encountered in her wealthy social circle. He had nothing, yet he remained decent. Her wealthy friends had everything, yet many were selfish, petty, consumed by accumulating more. The contrast fascinated her. One October morning, Eleanor finally introduced herself properly. Thomas was reading a battered paperback novel, his dog Max curled beside him. Eleanor sat on the bench nearby and spoke. "That's a good book. Graham Greene, isn't it?" Thomas looked up, surprised. "Yes, ma'am. The Quiet American. Found it in a free library box on Newbury Street." His voice was educated, refined even, not what people expected from a homeless man. "You're well read," Eleanor observed. "I was a teacher once. English literature. Before—" He trailed off, the past too painful to detail. "Before life happened. I'm Eleanor. I've seen you here for years, but never properly introduced myself. Thomas, and this is Max." He gestured to the dog, who wagged his tail. They talked for an hour that morning. Thomas was cautious at first, unsure why a wealthy Beacon Hill woman was engaging him in conversation. But Eleanor's genuine interest gradually drew him out. He'd been a high school English teacher in Vermont, married, happy. Then his wife died suddenly of an aneurysm, and grief destroyed him. He'd started drinking, lost his job, lost everything. By the time he got sober, he was on the streets with nothing and no way back. "Why Boston?" Eleanor asked. "Seemed as good as anywhere. My wife and I honeymooned here. She loved this city. Being here makes me feel closer to her somehow." That conversation was the first of many. Eleanor began bringing Thomas coffee and pastries during her morning walks. They'd sit on the bench and talk about books, about life, about everything and nothing. Thomas never asked for money or help. He accepted Eleanor's coffee and company with quiet gratitude, but demanded nothing. Through their conversations, Eleanor learned Thomas's full story. He'd been sober for 4 years now, attended AA meetings at a church that allowed homeless individuals. He'd tried getting back into teaching, but his years of homelessness created gaps in his resume that no school district would overlook. He survived on occasional day labor, food banks, and the kindness of strangers. Despite everything, he remained hopeful, kind, unwilling to let bitterness poison his soul. Eleanor admired that tremendously. She'd known wealthy people who became bitter over minor inconveniences. Thomas had lost everything and remained gracious. As Eleanor's illness progressed and her energy waned, she found herself thinking more about legacy. What did she want to leave behind? Victoria would inherit millions and probably spend them on handbags and vacation homes. The money wouldn't change her daughter's life meaningfully. Victoria was already wealthy through marriage. The money would just become more money, sitting in accounts, generating interest, meaning nothing. But for someone like Thomas, even modest resources could mean everything. The difference between survival and stability, between homelessness and home. One morning in late November, Eleanor made her decision. She called her attorney, a longtime friend named Richard Morrison, and explained what she wanted to do. Richard was skeptical. "Eleanor, I understand you've befriended this man, but leaving your entire Beacon Hill property to a homeless stranger is extreme. What about Victoria? She's your daughter." Eleanor's voice was firm. "Victoria doesn't need it. She married wealth, lives in a Kensington mansion, and visits me once a year if I'm lucky. Thomas needs it. And more importantly, Thomas will appreciate it. He'll understand what a gift it is." "Have you told Thomas about this?" Richard asked. "No. I don't want him to know until after I'm gone. I don't want gratitude or changed behavior. I want to give this gift purely, without expectation or obligation." Richard sighed, but agreed to draft the necessary documents. Eleanor was of sound mind. Her doctors confirmed that. She had the right to leave her property to anyone she chose. The will was updated. The Beacon Hill townhouse, worth approximately $4 million, would go to Thomas. Eleanor left her financial investments to Victoria, still a substantial inheritance of $8 million. But the house, the home Eleanor loved, filled with memories and meaning, would belong to Thomas. Eleanor told no one but Richard. She continued her morning walks when she had strength, sitting with Thomas, talking about books and life. Thomas had no idea that the kind, elderly woman who'd befriended him was about to change his life forever. As Christmas approached, Eleanor grew weaker. She could no longer walk to the park. Thomas noticed her absence and worried. He didn't know where she lived or how to check on her. He simply hoped the kind woman was all right. Eleanor died peacefully on December 23rd in her townhouse bedroom, surrounded by hospice nurses, her faithful housekeeper Mrs. Chen, and finally Victoria, who'd flown in when the end was imminent. Victoria held her mother's hand at the end, crying, perhaps genuinely sad, perhaps already calculating her inheritance. Eleanor's last thoughts were of Robert, of the life they'd built together, and of Thomas, the stranger she'd chosen to inherit that life. The reading of the will occurred the day after Christmas in Richard Morrison's downtown office. Victoria arrived expecting to inherit everything. Richard began with the financial investments, $8 million to Victoria. She smiled, satisfied. Then Richard continued, "And the Beacon Hill property, located at 47 Mount Vernon Street, including all contents, furnishings and possessions contained therein, is bequeathed to Thomas Michael Reynolds." Victoria's face went blank. "Who?" "Thomas Reynolds, a man your mother befriended. She wanted him to have the house." Victoria's shock transformed to rage. "This is insane. My mother left our family home to a stranger. On what grounds? She must have been incompetent, confused by medication." Richard interrupted calmly. "Your mother was evaluated by 3 physicians, all of whom confirmed her complete mental competency. She knew exactly what she was doing and why. The will is legally sound." "Then it's undue influence," Victoria insisted. "This Thomas person manipulated her, took advantage of an elderly woman. Thomas Reynolds is homeless and had no idea your mother was leaving him anything. He couldn't have manipulated her because he didn't know there was anything to manipulate." Eleanor made this decision independently. Victoria stood, her face flushed. I'm contesting this. That house has been in our family for half a century. I grew up there. You can't give it to some random homeless man. You can contest it, Richard said, but you'll lose. Your mother's wishes were clear and legally unassailable. My advice is to accept the $8 million you've inherited and let your mother's final gift stand. Victoria stormed out, promising legal action, but Richard had expected that and prepared accordingly. The will was ironclad. Now came the harder part, finding Thomas and telling him. Richard hired a private investigator who located Thomas within 2 days. He still frequented the park, though he'd been despondent since Eleanor stopped appearing. He feared she'd died and grieved quietly for the kind woman who'd treated him like a human being. Richard approached Thomas on a cold December morning. Thomas sat on his bench, Max beside him, looking at the frozen ground. Richard sat down, introducing himself as Eleanor Whitmore's attorney. Thomas's face crumpled. She passed, didn't she? I knew something was wrong when she stopped coming. Yes, Richard confirmed. 3 days ago, peacefully at home. She was good to me, Thomas said softly. One of the best people I've ever known. The world's worse without her. Thomas, Eleanor left you something in her will, something significant. I need you to come with me. Thomas looked confused. I don't understand. I barely knew her. We just talked in the park. She knew you better than you think. Please, come with me. And bring Max. You'll both need to see this. Richard drove Thomas to Beacon Hill. Thomas grew increasingly confused and anxious as they navigated the wealthy neighborhood. When Richard parked in front of the magnificent 4-story brownstone on Mount Vernon Street, Thomas assumed they were meeting someone inside. Richard unlocked the front door and gestured for Thomas to enter. The foyer was elegant. Marble floors, a crystal chandelier, artwork on walls, a sweeping staircase ascending to upper floors. Thomas stood frozen, afraid to step on the pristine floors with his worn boots. "Why are we here?" he asked. Richard handed him an envelope. "Eleanor left you a letter." Read it. With shaking hands, Thomas opened the envelope and unfolded the handwritten letter. Eleanor's elegant script covered 2 pages. "Dear Thomas," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone, and Richard has brought you to my house. I should say to your house now, because I've left it to you. The entire property is yours, the building, the contents, everything. This isn't charity and it's not pity, it's recognition." Thomas looked up at Richard, uncomprehending. "This is a joke." "It's not," Richard said. "Keep reading." Thomas returned to the letter, his vision blurring with tears as Eleanor's words continued. "For 6 years, I watched you in that park. I saw your kindness, your integrity, your refusal to let homelessness strip away your humanity. I watched you help others, despite having nothing yourself. I watched you read, learn, grow, maintain your soul in circumstances that destroy most people. You deserve a home, Thomas, and I want my home to be yours." Adul, the letter explained everything. How Eleanor had no real relationship with her daughter, how she'd rather her beloved house go to someone who'd appreciate it, how she hoped Thomas would fill these rooms with life and maybe even literature, turning some space into the library he'd always dreamed of. She ended with, "Don't feel guilty, don't feel undeserving. You are worthy of this gift, Thomas. Live well, be happy, and every so often, think kindly of the old woman who found friendship in a park. Eleanor." Thomas collapsed onto the marble floor, weeping. Max whined and licked his face, confused by his master's distress. Richard knelt beside him. "Thomas, are you all right?" "She gave me a house," Thomas choked out. "A house? I've been sleeping on benches for 6 years, and she gave me a house. A $4 million house," Richard clarified, "in one of Boston's most expensive neighborhoods." Thomas couldn't process it. Richard gave him time, then gently guided him through the property. 4 floors of elegant living space, 6 bedrooms, multiple bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a rooftop garden with views of the Boston skyline. Every room was furnished with beautiful antiques and art. Eleanor's presence lingered in every corner, her reading glasses on a side table, her favorite shawl draped over a chair, photographs of her life with Robert covering surfaces. Thomas moved through the house in a daze, touching things hesitantly, unable to believe any of this was real. In the master bedroom, he found another envelope on the bed with his name on it. Inside was a letter from Eleanor's housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, and a check for $20,000. Mrs. Chen's letter explained that Eleanor had left instructions for her to help Thomas transition into the house, to show him how everything worked, to stock the kitchen with food, to help him adjust. The $20,000 was for immediate expenses, new clothes, anything he needed. Thomas sat on Eleanor's bed, his bed now, and wept until he had no tears left. Max jumped up beside him, something the dog would never have dared on a stranger's bed. But somehow, understanding this, was home now. Richard sat in a chair nearby, waiting patiently. Finally, Thomas found his voice. "Why me? I'm nobody. I've accomplished nothing with my life." Eleanor didn't see it that way, Richard replied. She saw someone who maintained his humanity and kindness, despite circumstances that would have broken most people. That meant everything to her. And frankly, Thomas, having known Eleanor for 30 years, I understand her choice completely. She wanted her home to go to someone who'd treasure it, not someone who'd see it as just another asset. "Her daughter must hate me," Thomas said. "Victoria is dealing with it," Richard said diplomatically. "She's threatened to contest the will, but she has no grounds. The house is legally yours." Over the following days, Mrs. Chen helped Thomas transition. She showed him how the heating system worked, where Eleanor kept important documents, how to operate the washer and dryer, things he hadn't needed to know for years. She took him shopping for clothes that fit properly, helped him open a bank account, walked him through basic home maintenance. Thomas was overwhelmed, but gradually began to accept that this wasn't a dream he'd wake from. Victoria did attempt to contest the will, hiring expensive lawyers to argue incompetency and undue influence. But Richard had prepared thoroughly. Medical records, witness testimonies, even videos of Eleanor explaining her decision proved her complete competency. The case was dismissed within 6 weeks. Victoria got her $8 million and cut off all contact with anything related to Boston or her mother's memory. Thomas felt guilty about the family rift, but Richard assured him Eleanor had made peace with Victoria's character long ago. By spring, Thomas had fully settled into the house. He'd converted one of the bedrooms into a home office and volunteered as an online tutor for underprivileged students, using his teaching skills again. He'd adopted 2 more rescue dogs to keep Max company. He'd started attending a local church where he'd found community. And he'd begun the project Eleanor had suggested, converting the library into a small free lending library, open to the neighborhood twice a week. People from Beacon Hill were initially skeptical of the homeless man who'd inherited Eleanor Whitmore's house. But Thomas won them over gradually through simple decency. He maintained the property beautifully, participated in neighborhood associations, and used Eleanor's house exactly as she'd hoped, as a home filled with warmth, books, and quiet kindness. 1 year after Eleanor's death, Thomas held a memorial gathering in her honor. He invited everyone she'd known, friends, neighbors, even Mrs. Chen and Richard. They filled the elegant townhouse, sharing stories about Eleanor, celebrating her life and her unexpected final gift. Thomas gave a short speech, his voice shaking with emotion. "Eleanor gave me more than a house. She gave me back my dignity, my purpose, my belief that goodness exists in the world. I was invisible for 6 years, just another homeless person people avoided looking at. But Eleanor saw me, really saw me, and she decided I deserved a second chance. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of her faith in me." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Several of Eleanor's friends approached Thomas afterward, apologizing for initially judging Eleanor's decision. They'd thought she was being foolish, giving away property to a stranger. But meeting Thomas, seeing how he honored Eleanor's memory and used her gift, They understood. Eleanor hadn't been foolish. She'd been wise, seeing something in Thomas that others had missed. Years passed. Thomas continued living in the house, never taking it for granted, always grateful. He eventually wrote a book about his experience, about homelessness, redemption, and the extraordinary kindness of one elderly woman. The book became a bestseller, and Thomas donated all proceeds to homeless services in Boston. He used his platform to speak about homelessness, breaking down stereotypes, reminding people that homeless individuals were human beings with stories, intelligence, and dignity. Victoria eventually remarried after divorcing her first husband and moved to New York. She never reconciled with Thomas or acknowledged her mother's gift as anything but an embarrassment. Thomas felt sad about that, but understood. Some people measure everything in money and status. Eleanor had hoped her daughter would learn different values. She hadn't, but that was Victoria's loss, not Thomas's burden to carry. Thomas often sat in Eleanor's library, his library now, surrounded by her books, feeling her presence. He talked to her sometimes, updating her on his life, thanking her again, promising to take care of her beloved house. He liked to think she could hear him somehow, that she knew how profoundly her gift had changed, not just his circumstances, but his entire life. He'd been existing, surviving. Now he was living, contributing, thriving. The house on Mount Vernon Street became known throughout Beacon Hill as a place of warmth and welcome. Thomas hosted community meetings, reading groups, AA gatherings, opening Eleanor's home to people who needed space and acceptance. He'd transformed from invisible homeless man to respected community member, all because one elderly woman chose to see his worth when everyone else looked away. It was Eleanor's greatest legacy, not the millions she'd accumulated, but the life she'd restored. Thomas thought often about the randomness of it all. What if he'd chosen a different park? What if Eleanor had walked a different route? What if he'd been having a bad day and hadn't said good morning to her that first time? His entire life had pivoted on such small moments, such unlikely chances. But maybe it wasn't random at all. Maybe Eleanor had been looking for someone exactly like Thomas, someone who'd lost everything but hadn't lost themselves. Maybe their friendship was always meant to be. Two lonely souls finding connection in an unlikely place. Thomas would never know for certain. What he knew was that Eleanor Whitmore had seen him when he was invisible, valued him when the world had discarded him, and trusted him with her most precious possession, not her money but her home. That trust, that extraordinary gift of faith in his worth, had given Thomas more than shelter. It had given him back himself.